Hello. Our guest today is Ottessa Moshfegh, who wrote this beautiful book, Un an de odihnă și relaxare in Romanian, My Year of Rest and Relaxation in English, which is quite an odd book, a very well written one, but surprisingly very disturbing. For me, at least, I have to confess this from the very beginning. It was very disturbing to read it because I found myself in it, partially, as many women did, I think, or will. Therefore, we invited Ottessa today to talk about it and about its inspiration and about all the motifs in this very particular book. Good evening, Ottessa.
Good evening, or good morning, where I am.
Thank you for having accepted our invitation, and we look forward to meeting you here in Bucharest sometime soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Can resume travel.
Yes. Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you. So I was saying that this book was very disturbing for me because it's a very high-end mixture of Sex and the City and a cult book about a whole generation. It's written it was published in 2018, but it describes events which go back to 2000, 2001.
Yes.
What was the inspiration for the book, and why this gap in time? Why write a book about that specific period of time, and what's the connection with 9/11?
Well, I wrote this book in the mid-2000 teens, and it was really inspired by the time I had spent in New York, the way that I felt about culture and how culture was shifting, and which included attitudes about art, attitudes about gender, attitudes about happiness, pharmaceuticals, loneliness, death, friendship, grief, all of those things. And I set it in the year preceding 9/11 because I realized in writing the book that the New York I was describing was not the contemporary Manhattan that we can go and visit right now. It was a Manhattan before it had been changed by the social, political, and cultural effects of 9/11. And I was interested to go back there because I think it's an interesting time, especially with the knowledge as the writer and the reader that things are about to shift dramatically. I lived in New York for like a decade. I moved there when I was 17 and went to college there and stayed. I was a senior in college in 2001 when the World Trade Center fell. And it had a profound effect on me, like it did like a lot of Americans for sure. And for me, it was really the first experience I had confronting death and disaster. Mm-hmm. I mean, I hadn't been an extremely sheltered person, but I had lost a grandparent, I had lost a friend, but the vibration of sorrow and shock that flooded the city was really palpable and really woke me up to reality and my mortality and what all of those things would mean moving forward, how my life was going to feel different. So I took that experience and brought it to this novel, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I think because I wanted to explore the profound existential discomfort that young people experience when we realize that time is passing and we too are not long for this earth. Like we're here for a minute and it's over. And I think certainly in my youth, I had this feeling like my future was infinite. Mm-hmm. There was, I could be multiple people. The decisions I made were never so black and white. I had this delusion that I could go back in time and revise my life, which is perhaps why I love being a novelist, because I get to go back in time and revise my novels. But in my early 20s, I that childhood delusion sort of vanished. And I was interested in exploring a character who was also confronting that and confronting her feelings about the life that she was dealt by the universe, and endeavoring to perhaps change that.
Well, that's true. We all lose that sense of immortality we have when we are teenagers or young adults. And there's a shift in our perception of reality happening. For me, it happened when I was 28. The death became palpable, not for me, but just as a concept. It wasn't something abstract anymore. Well, I was listening to what you were saying about the universe dealing you a hand, which you might not want to accept. The character in the book, which very interestingly, doesn't have a name. It's an unnamed character, a young, beautiful, quite rich, educated, sophisticated, elegant woman living in Manhattan. Runs away, actually. Her way of facing reality and facing the truth of her situation, the loss of her parents, the loss of a proper love life, the loss of a social circle as well, because she has just one friend, Riva. So her way of dealing with all of this is to seek sleep through a kind of medical solace. And this is the funny part of your book. Your humor is terrible, and I really enjoyed the book also because of this. And I wanted to say from the very beginning that this is a book about anything but rest and relaxation. That's nothing to be found there in the book. So why this? Why trying to go through life while sleeping with a lot of pills, with the help of a lot of pills? And my curiosity is, did you have a background? Not that you were taking so many meds, but did you do your research thoroughly because I suppose the information in the book is accurate. I don't think anyone would try and mix all these pills, Valium and all the others, but how did you think of this, of putting yourself to sleep for a year, that year of rest and relaxation, and of combining so many medicines?
Well, I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but as a member of American society, medications are very prevalent. And I mean, it's really kind of a phenomenon how many people are medicated for their emotional issues in this country. And it says a lot about our culture that we both are suffering, and instead of looking at the root cause of our unhappiness, our anxiety, our inability to cope in another way, we have this incredibly large industry and a medical network designed for the sole purpose of medicating away our problems. So, even though I'm not someone who, like my protagonist, took an enormous amount of sedatives to put myself to sleep, just being around people and, having close friendships and having my own, experiences with anxiety, it's everywhere here. And and I think, maybe at this point we've walked back a bit as a country in terms of over prescribing. I mean, don't quote me on that. But when I was in college and transitioning into adulthood, which was around the turn of the millennium, medicating oneself was like eating breakfast. Mm-hmm. So it was, yes, there's a huge satirical, exaggerated element in the novel. No normal human being could withstand the amount of drugs this woman is ingesting. And I think, in a way, it's more acceptable as a fiction that it's so over the top. And I wanted to explore this theory of rest and relaxation being the thing that we need in order to heal and recover and even transform. The character in my novel has this notion that because life has been so exhausting, and especially most recently for our unnamed protagonist, has lost her father to cancer and her mother in a mysterious sort of overdose, mysteriously suicidal overdose of pills and alcohol, which is also something that is like wrecking this country, first and foremost by the opioid epidemic here. So it's sadly not so unusual to lose someone to a drug overdose here. But because she was really just abandoned in this moment in her early 20s when she's like trying to realize who she is, she's exhausted by the emotional impact of those deaths. Mm-hmm. And has no support system, no real inner wisdom or strength. And so as an intelligent person thinks, well, I need to take some action. Mm-hmm. And maybe, just maybe, if I allow my mind to shut down, my deeper wisdom will emerge, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if your mind is the thing that's telling you all of these thoughts that make you feel so terrible, well, if your mind goes to sleep and the rest of you is able to recover from that trauma, maybe, just maybe, you'll wake up and feel like a different person. You'll feel rejuvenated. You'll feel healed. You'll feel fully adjusted to this new permutation of self. Mm-hmm. So, I wouldn't recommend that. Sure, taking a nap when you've had a tough week is one thing, but, it is a novel, and in a novel, anything goes as long as you can be convincing and tell, an engaging story. So I was curious, what would happen if someone endeavored to sleep for a week? What would come up for that character?
Mm-hmm. So she becomes Sleeping Beauty, but it's interesting that you wrote it in the first person. And especially in this part of the world, as you were saying, in our woods, there's this notion of self-fiction, following the French example, that whatever you put in writing must be about you, especially if you write it in the first person, or that an author writing about such things must borrow things from her own life. What can you say to such an idea? When I suppose people have asked you this before. Is it about you? Have you gone through such experiences? Have you thought about ingesting so many pills? Have you thought about suicide and stuff? How much of you can be found in the book, especially since you wrote it in the first person?
It's an interesting question because I have written a novella, 3 novels, and a book of short stories, and almost everything I write is in the first person. Yeah. And that's, you know, and there's a good reason for that. And it's not because I'm writing only about myself. Mm-hmm. As a writer, I mean, and this is getting a little bit more into the craft of writing, but I have been really interested in occupying the consciousness of a character. Mm-hmm. And I see my work, as an attempt to deliver a sort of literary monologue, to have a character speak from her own mind and experience, gives me an opportunity to tell a story in a very specific way according to that character's journey. For example, if I'm in my character's mind, if she's narrating her story, I not only get to tell the story in its objective plot, but I get to see things through her eyes. I get to hear her associations with the scenes that are being captured in the story. What memories come up for her? What does this make her think of? What is she imagining? And in addition to all that, what is she lying to herself about? Where is she transparent? Where is she incapable of going mentally? And I love that. It's for me, it's like this almost like an acting exercise. Mm-hmm. And I've found that that's just been a really beautiful thing for me as a writer, to get to be other people and tell other people's stories. But to your question, and I think that, you know, you make a good argument for why people would assume that writing in first person is somehow a way of writing about yourself. And I would just say this: whether it's the first person, second person, third person, anything that comes out of an author is filtered through, you know, the mind of the author, the sensibility of the author, the ambition of the author. So, you know, whether there are some biographical details is kind of like irrelevant, because just essentially speaking, the story is created by me. Mm-hmm. So while my character may have very different attitudes, her psychological makeup could be very, very different from mine, I'm still interpreting it and delivering it to the reader. Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be a level of me in anything I write.
Well, that's true. So in any book, all characters are the author. As Flaubert was saying, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. So it's absolutely truthful to say that you are her and she's you, and all the other characters, by being created by you, reflect some part of your thinking or some part of your feeling. And that's how it should be. And it's also interesting that if you take reality as it is and you put it in fiction, it doesn't work. It has to have a code of itself and within the world you create, and that world has its own rules. But now you take New York, as you were saying before, a major shift, and you recreate it in a very particular way because we recognize it. There are all the elements there. That's why I said that it's a mixture of Sex and the City, because it's like this glamour world and all the pop culture, tiny details, and somehow that feeling that everything around is decay. Not that New York would be decay, but that's how it feels to live in a modern metropolis. And it's interesting to see this reflected in her vision, as you said. But also at the same time, there's something darker inside. So I had the feeling while reading the book that I see the exterior, the external world developing at the same pace with the internal world, which was quite restricted because she was sleeping most of the time, but at the same time, her conscience was working heavily. And it's funny that while she sleeps, her body takes action. So you were saying that she was trying to put her mind at ease and then to rest it, but she's doing things which she's not aware of. Is this possible? Did you research this? She's not narcoleptic, and she's not walking in her sleep. She doesn't fall asleep quite like that. That's what I said. Although there are passages in which you write that she says, I'm just going to fall asleep a bit now, and then she falls asleep, and then she wakes up after a couple of days. How accurate is this part of how the body works when the mind shuts down in your novel?
I don't know how accurate it is, and I wasn't worried so much about the rules of the game in real life, but I have always been fascinated by these really terrifying accounts of things that people have done in their sleep. And I think it really hits on a very primal fear that you might do something that you didn't mean to do. And, when Ambien, the sleeping medication came out there, it still happens. If you look for it, you'll find it. These stories, somebody goes to sleep at night and they wake up and they're driving on the freeway. Or, there are cases with people with sleep disorders who have murdered their husband or wife or spouse in their sleep,
How convenient.
Well, I guess it's convenient, but it's also terrifying to me. And I always think that it's interesting whenever you have a character who is repressed in some way. I always find it interesting to give them an opportunity to act out their real desires and interests without their moralizing judgment or, self-control or will getting in the way.
Yeah, that's true. And it works in the book. How about Mrs. Tuttle, Dr. Tuttle, the psychiatrist? She's in therapy, the protagonist, and she goes to this awful therapist. She's a caricature, but at the same time, I suppose such doctors exist because she fools her, the doctor, all the time. The doctor believes all the stories that the protagonist says, and she doesn't remember a thing. I started counting at some time while reading the book how many times she tells the doctor that her parents died, and the doctor doesn't remember, and she keeps asking her, and how easy it is for her to give out prescriptions. How did you create this character? Was it a caricature? Was it based on someone you knew? Or I suppose now in Europe as well, and when I say Europe, I also mean Romania, or mostly Romania. But I suppose in the US, it's something vital. It's something, as you were saying, like having breakfast to be in therapy. If you're not in therapy, there must be something wrong with you.
Well, I would say that it's really it's a common thing in a certain class of people. Certainly not everybody goes to a therapist, but I think that there, a lot of professional type people who have trouble handling their stress. Sure. There's a lot, marriage counselors and things like that. The thing about this doctor is that she's really not a therapist. She's a psychiatrist. And she isn't interested in the truth of the matter. She's there simply to treat the symptoms which the character has come to complain about. And she herself seems extremely medicated, the doctor. Yes. So, it definitely was a caricature. It was definitely like one of the heavily satirical elements of the book, and also sort of the most comedic. And I always sort of veer into comedy in my writing, and in moments where I feel like, well, this is getting kind of heavy, and maybe the heaviness isn't actually going to benefit my book. So, it is a book about a young person choosing to eschew her real issues through sleep. So I figured, well, wouldn't it be interesting if she could find a professional who not only agreed with that approach, but encouraged it.
Which is quite rare. So that there's a talent there as well to find such a doctor. Well, in case one would want to do that. But the book goes deeper than that. So the character, it's funny that I have to call her the protagonist or the character, or let's call her she. She knows she's depressed, and at the same time she accepts it. It's like, oh, whatever, I'm just going to watch some movies. And the pop culture I was mentioning before is very present here. Whoopi Goldberg is very present in the book. And I thought that's also very funny, because Whoopi Goldberg, I thought about it. First, I thought maybe you like her. I like her too. So it was just a way of putting an actor that you like in your writing. But also she's the opposite of the protagonist. She's older, she's Black, she comes from a different class, she's an extrovert because she's an actress. The character, she is quite the opposite. She's an introvert. She works in an art gallery where she mostly sleeps, and she has a very different kind of life. How did all this help you to build the thin network of the novel, helping her? The movies she watches, Whoopi Goldberg, everything that happens in New York. These are very, very tiny elements, but combined, they give it not only that humorous side, but also an acute sense of reality.
Yeah. I mean, it was a totally instinctual move to choose Whoopi Goldberg as the protagonist's hero. And I definitely relied on my own affection for Whoopi Goldberg's early films, and how much she broke the mold in so many ways. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't really like about my protagonist. I mean, it would be hard to befriend her. But I also needed some common ground, and I thought, well, I will give her this Whoopi Goldberg affection
as a peace offering,
as a way to humanize her and a way to soften her a bit. I mean, someone who was raised with a very cold and addicted mother, a very cold and removed father. I think for her, Whoopi Goldberg is extremely comforting. I mean, she's personable. She isn't threatening in any way. She's not competitive. She's absolutely in her own category. And what I think her presence in film does is she's charged with a kind of self-honesty that I find to be really peculiar to Whoopi Goldberg, and also completely distinct from any other actor's persona. Like, I don't know anyone who has the effect that she does. When I see Whoopi Goldberg, I not only am aware that this is Whoopi Goldberg, I'm aware of the artifice of the film around her. And she starts to represent for me the reality. I feel like she's on my side. And I think that she's beautiful, like a beautiful person. And I think she's had a really interesting career. And so I wanted to sort of pay homage to her and also use her as a character and focal point for the protagonist.
That's true, and it works. So it's like she's balancing the reality of the character, because otherwise the character would be living in a world of trauma and sleep and dreams and drugs. Now, was it difficult for you to finish writing the book? Were there moments when you thought, okay, now what? So I put her to sleep once, twice, so many times. She's talking to her friend. She's reminiscing about her boyfriend, about her parents, the same thing, on and on and on. Did you think, okay, maybe it's not what I meant it to be from the beginning, now I should just drop it? Were you stuck at some time while in the process of writing it?
I did get stuck. I got majorly stuck. And I tried to unstick myself by writing a lot of different versions of the second half of the book. It took a lot of trial and error to explore really thematically where I wanted to go, and then a lot of trial and error to figure out pragmatically how the story needed to work. So it wasn't an easy book to write. And in hindsight, I can see that was just the process. And actually, conceptually and structurally, it's a pretty simple book. It doesn't have a wild plot. There aren't different sections from different points of view. It's a story delivered from the protagonist in hindsight. And when she decides to do her deep dive into the subconscious, that was really what to do with that was really the thing that took, a year to finally find.
A year of work and frustration.
Yes, it was definitely the biggest challenge of the book.
Are you satisfied with the ending? The ending is quite anticlimactic because it's the event 9/11 and then it ends, and you don't know what happened to her. I'm not going to spoil it by saying what happens to the people around her, but it's just that she came all this way up to 9/11 or a bit later, and then her story ends. And you're left with this feeling, okay, so she was not coping very well before 9/11. What is she going to do now? Is she waking up? If yes, is she going to stay alive? It's kind of, you're left with this urge of cheering for her somehow. So why this ending so abrupt and without any possibility of confrontation with the reality that comes after that?
Everyone has a different response to the ending. Some people tell me, wow, I walked away from that book feeling so totally complete. And it was whatever. I'm totally satisfied with the ending. Without giving anything away, I think that the protagonist experiences something deeply for the first time, and that it's beautiful, even if it's horrible. So to me, in a sense, her experiment with the sleep, she achieved something. She put herself in a position to be vulnerable and awake to her own feelings. And that really was the story of getting there. I mean, you could make another argument and say, well, she's probably been brain damaged and, her mind doesn't function well anymore. And, that could be true too. But I think I like endings that can be interpreted according to the reader's need. You know, like if you need to wonder what happens next, you'll wonder that. You know, like if you need to reflect on mortality and grief, you will, you know. I tend to do that a lot with my books. Most of my novels end with sort of a new beginning, like an opportunity for another story. Maybe that's just the way that my imagination works.
Mm-hmm. No, it totally works. And I'm thinking, how do you sleep?
Me?
What is your sleep pattern? Do you sleep a lot?
I don't sleep enough. I never sleep enough. I sleep with dogs. I basically, like, I can't sleep without, well, it's hard to sleep without my dog. One of my dogs. I have 4 dogs.
What breed?
Just a mutt, a beautiful, gorgeous mutt.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very sweet boy. My relationship with sleep has always been annoying. I mean, I've had periods of insomnia. I have periods of just total exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt tired. Like my whole life, I've felt tired. And kind of, right? I know I'm not the only one. And you know, and maybe this book sort of emanated out of a subconscious desire to like not feel tired anymore. Like, oh God, if I could just sleep enough one night, you know? But on the other hand, like I don't have any children. I work from home. You know, I have the luxury of, you know, sitting in a comfy chair. I don't have to run around. Like, so I really shouldn't be this tired, but
what can I say? It's nice that somehow through your character, you've kind of delegated this task to somebody else. It's like you said to
right.
her, sleep for me, and I'll promise I'll write your story. Mm-hmm. Well, it's very interesting and also very different from what you wrote before. And I was thinking while you were saying that all your characters or most of your characters are written in the first person, I was thinking about McGlue, sailor from the 19th century, and a man, a very, very different type of character. But there's something, I find that there's something very raw in your writing. I mean, at the core of all your characters, something which is boiling inside. And in this character as well, in My Year of Rest and Relaxation, she's asleep and she couldn't care less, and she's whatever, but you kind of feel that she's struggling inside just to reach out and to continue living. Well, sex is also very present in the book, paradoxically, because she's alone, but she's reminiscing her experiences with her boyfriend, with Trevor, and there's this pulsion of life that you can feel in it. And I was thinking, how did you plot it around the idea of Eros versus Thanatos, so death and love and Eros? The erotic side is always pushing life forward. So there's this scene of her watching 2 porn movies with her girlfriend, and there's nothing porn or erotic in it. It's kind of funny, and I suppose it was meant to be funny. But there's also something so sad about it, because you just understand that the erotic pulsion is driving you forward. And when that also is lacking, you must be very worried about your drive in life. Did you think about this when you wrote it?
Not deeply. It was more instinctual. I knew that my character did not feel loved. I mean, I think that's sort of one of her principal wounds, is that she was never really loved. And even when her friend Riva says, "I love you," you know, she, the protagonist, feels that it's something Riva is saying for herself. The feeling of being loved cannot penetrate inside of this character. And by extension, her sexual experiences have been really bad. Like, there hasn't been any sort of real intimacy or even excitement, really. They seem performative. They seem to be about power. They seem to be even a little bit like masochistic. And I mean, I actually think that is probably the very realistic picture of what a woman like this would experience, and what she would seek out. She doesn't want an actual relationship. She doesn't want to really allow herself to be free and explore her body and her feelings. I mean, she's a very rigid person in a lot of ways. And that's really what I wanted to explore. And also her revulsion for sex in the sense of it being a way to connect to another person. And I think her resistance against intimacy is really a way of steeling herself to be safe from having to feel anything.
Yeah, so it comes out of fear. That's the gist of it. I don't know if this is the original cover of the book. It is. So yes. It's so interesting. It's like, it's so typical. I mean, the New Yorker feeling comes out even through the cover, the choice of the photo of the cover. Yeah. Because one can take this novel to be quite fancy, quite posh, quite literary fiction, dealing with not so deep motifs, but it's not true. So as you were saying, once you read it, you just have this feeling of finding the whole range. You were telling me about the people who feel complete after finishing it. It's about, well, there's something for anybody in it. So and this cosmopolitan feeling about it is what makes it so interesting, especially for us here, I suppose, because we kind of keep that mirage of the New York that we picture, and once we get to New York, it's never the same. So it's as we see it in books or in movies, or that perception that we had of it. Well, thank you so much for this lovely talk about your book. Thank you. What are you writing now? Something totally different?
I did write something totally different. In the past year and a half, I wrote a novel. And it's my first novel in the third person, which was really, really fun.
Quite something.
And it's about a village in maybe Eastern Europe, a fictional place, in the late Middle Ages. And it's sort of the story of this pretty large cast of characters and how their lives intersect, and this really strange thing happens. And so I'm really excited about that. And these days I'm mostly working in film. I've been writing screenplays and developing some projects, adapting some of my own books for film.
Are you adapting this?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. So is it going to be a series or?
It'll be a feature film.
Oh, that's great. And can you tell us who's going to play her?
No.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. And one last question, because it came to me now that you were talking about what topic you chose for your next novel, which is very, very different from this, the village in the Middle Ages. You know that they say that there are two kinds of writers, those who write the same book over and over again under a different form, and those who reinvent themselves and have the inspiration or the guts to always choose something else, what's interesting for them. I suppose you're the second kind of writer, right?
I think so. I think so. I wouldn't, self-repetition is like maybe one of my biggest fears as a writer. And I like to follow my instincts into things that are really unfamiliar. That to me is really exciting. However, there are themes and questions that I know that I will be asking perpetually. I mean, and they're probably the big questions, like the questions about God, death, love, experience, consciousness, all those kinds of things, family. So, I mean, I think, you know, by the time I'm gone, you could probably look at my books and something would emerge to say, oh, she was doing this, you know?
What is the main question that this book raises, and the main question for you? And have you answered yourself while reading or while writing it? Sorry.
I mean, I feel like the question is, can I love myself? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's sort of the root of the book. And, I mean, my answer is absolutely. Absolutely. You can. Mm-hmm. And I do. Mm-hmm. So
that's a great question and a great answer. And I suppose everybody should be asking this out of themselves and of the others. Can I love myself, and therefore can I love others as well? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Ottessa, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation and the book. And we're waiting for you here to come and talk about your previous and future books.
Oh, I'm dying to come. I've never been to Romania and I can't wait.
Well, it's quite far, but it's worth it.
I'm sure.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye.